The sharp knock shattered the silence in my living room like a gunshot. My fingers tightened around my teacup, nearly dropping it as my heart pounded against my ribs. It wasn't just loud. It was urgent, frantic, almost desperate. Before we get into the details, write in the comments where you're watching this video from. No one ever knocked on my door this late. Not in my quiet Austin neighborhood, where the most excitement usually came from a misplaced Amazon package. For a moment, I stayed frozen, my mind racing through possibilities. Was it an emergency? A neighbor in trouble? A complete stranger? Another knock, louder this time, insistent. "I'm coming," I called out, my voice unsteady. I approached the door cautiously, hesitating before gripping the doorknob. The last person I expected to find on my doorstep was standing right there. David, my neighbor. But he wasn't the easygoing, friendly man who waved at me each morning from across the lawn. No, this David looked as if he'd been caught in a storm. His face was pale, his dark hair disheveled, and his normally kind, unassuming eyes were wild with something raw, something unspoken. "Claire," he breathed, his chest rising and falling as if he had just finished running. "I need to talk to you." The air between us thickened. My skin prickled with unease. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" I asked, stepping back to let him in. But he didn't wait for permission. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him with a finality that sent a chill up my spine. "David, you're scaring me," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "What's going on?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he ran a trembling hand through his hair, pacing the small space like a man with a burden too heavy to bear. The tension pouring off him made the air feel thick and suffocating. Finally, he exhaled shakily. "I can't keep this inside anymore." His voice cracked on the last word. I frowned, confusion tightening my chest. "What are you talking about?" David stopped pacing. When he turned to face me, his dark eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made my stomach twist. "I've been trying to ignore it, Claire," he said, his words tumbling out in a rush. "For years, I've told myself to forget, to move on, to pretend it's not real. But I can't. I won't." My pulse thundered in my ears. My breath came shallow, uneven. What can't you ignore?" Then came the words that shattered everything. "I'm in love with you." The room spun. My grip tightened on the chair behind me, grounding myself in something solid. I must have misheard him. "What?" "I love you, Claire." His voice was softer now, but no less firm. "I have for years." I stared at him, my mind scrambling for logic, for understanding. This couldn't be happening.
Not now.
Not with him. "David," I started, but the words died before they could form. "I know how this sounds," he cut in, stepping closer. "I know it's wrong, but I can't lie to myself anymore. And you deserve to know the truth." I backed up until my shoulders hit the wall, my heart pounding like a trapped bird in my chest. My husband, my son, my carefully built, predictable life. This was never supposed to happen. David, he had been nothing more than polite smiles, small talk about the weather, a familiar presence on the other side of the fence. Until now. David, I don't know what to say," I stammered. "You don't have to say anything," he murmured. "I just needed you to know." The weight of his confession settled between us, thick and suffocating. And then, before I could even begin to process his words, another sound broke through the tension. A knock.
Sharp. Loud.
My body went rigid. My first thought, who else could it be? My second thought, what if it's my husband? David's face paled again, his eyes darting to the door. "Are you expecting someone?" "No," I whispered, panic tightening my throat. The knock came again, harder this time. The night had already unraveled into something I didn't recognize. And now, in an instant, it had turned into something far worse, a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Claire's breath caught in her throat. The room, already too small, seemed to shrink even further. She and David stood frozen, the tension between them electric, unbearable. The knocking came again, loud, insistent. David took a sharp breath, his body coiled tight like a spring. "Do you think it's—" "I don't know," Claire whispered, barely able to form the words. Her hands trembled as she reached for the doorknob, her mind racing with possibilities. If it was Adam, if he had somehow sensed that something was wrong, that something was happening, then everything, her entire life, could unravel in the next few seconds. She turned the handle slowly, her breath shallow. The door creaked open. It wasn't Adam. It was her neighbor, Mrs. Hayworth, an elderly woman from 2 houses down, wrapped in a thick robe despite the warm night air. She peered at Claire with wide, worried eyes. "Oh, thank goodness you're awake," she said breathlessly. "I'm so sorry for disturbing you this late, dear, but I need help." Claire exhaled sharply, relief flooding through her so fast it made her knees weak. She nodded quickly, forcing herself to appear normal. "What's wrong?" she asked, stepping onto the porch, carefully pulling the door closed behind her just enough to block Mrs. Hayworth's view inside. She could feel David's presence behind her, silent, waiting. "My smoke alarm won't stop going off, and I don't know how to make it stop." The older woman clutched her hands together. "I hate to bother you, but I just didn't know who else to call." Claire swallowed, nodding. "Of course. I'll come take a look." She turned slightly, just enough to glance at David. Their eyes met for the briefest moment, and she saw the same thought mirrored in his gaze. This was the only way out of whatever had just happened. A chance to reset.
To breathe.
"I'll go with you," David said suddenly. Claire's stomach twisted, but she didn't argue. If David stayed in her house any longer, the weight of his confession, the storm still raging in his eyes, might swallow them both whole. Mrs. Hayworth beamed. "Oh, you're both such sweethearts." Claire forced a smile, stepping off the porch, her heartbeat still thundering in her ears. David followed silently. As they walked toward Mrs. Hayworth's house, Claire could feel David's closeness. Too close, too much. His presence was overwhelming. Her mind kept replaying his words, "I'm in love with you." The weight of them pressed down on her, threatening to suffocate her with the sheer enormity of what they meant. She wasn't ready to deal with it. Not now. Not ever. When they reached the house, David quickly handled the smoke alarm issue, disconnecting the faulty detector and reassuring Mrs. Hayworth that everything was fine. Claire barely heard the exchange. She stood near the doorway, arms wrapped around herself, trying to steady her breathing. When they finally stepped outside again, the night air was thick with humidity. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. David finally turned to her. "Claire." "No," her voice came out sharper than she intended. She took a step back, shaking her head. This can't happen." Pain flickered across his face, but he nodded, stuffing his hands into his pockets. "I know. Do you?" She swallowed hard, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "Because you just turned my life upside down. You." Her voice broke, and she sucked in a breath, trying to steady herself. "You can't just say things like that, David." He exhaled slowly. "I know," he repeated, softer this time. I couldn't hold it in anymore." Claire clenched her jaw, fighting the emotions threatening to spill over. You have to. You have to forget whatever this is." She glanced toward her house, suddenly desperate to be anywhere but here.
"Please.
Just go home." For a moment, he looked like he wanted to argue, like he wanted to fight for whatever was happening between them. But instead he nodded, stepping back. "Good night, Claire," he murmured.
She didn't respond.
She turned on her heel and walked back to her house, each step heavier than the last. When she reached the front door, she hesitated for only a second before slipping inside and locking it behind her. She leaned against the door, closing her eyes. This never happened, she told herself. This never happened. But even as she repeated the words, she knew she was lying. The next morning, Claire moved through her routine like a ghost. She made breakfast for Adam and their son, packed lunches, cleaned up dishes, every movement automatic, rehearsed. But inside, her mind was a tangled mess. David's words haunted her. His voice, his expression, the way he had looked at her, as if he had stripped himself bare and offered her something fragile and real. And she had slammed the door on it.
Good, she told herself.
That's what had to happen. But then why did she feel like something inside her had cracked? As she poured herself a cup of coffee, she glanced out the kitchen window. And there he was. David was in his backyard, shirtless, working on something near his shed. His muscles tensed and flexed with each movement, his skin glistening slightly under the early morning sun. Claire swallowed hard.
She needed to stop this.
She needed to pull herself together. But when David turned, as if sensing her eyes on him, and their gazes met across the yard, something deep inside her clenched. It was dangerous. And it was far from over. Claire tore her gaze away from the window, her pulse hammering in her throat. She gripped the edge of the counter, forcing herself to take slow, steady breaths. This was insane. She was acting like a lovesick teenager, sneaking glances, letting her thoughts spiral where they had no business going. She needed to focus. Dishes, laundry, groceries, normal things, safe things. With mechanical precision, she busied herself, scrubbing the countertops as if she could erase the thoughts running rampant in her head. But no matter how hard she tried, the weight of David's confession lingered, heavy and suffocating. Her phone buzzed. For a split second, she hesitated before picking it up. A message from David. "David, can we talk?" Claire's fingers tightened around the phone.
No.
There was nothing to talk about. She had made that clear last night. And yet, she didn't delete the message. Instead, she set the phone down, turning her attention to the sink, rinsing dishes that were already clean. Minutes passed. Then another buzz. "David, please, Claire. Just 5 minutes." She shouldn't. She knew that. But her feet were already moving. Without giving herself time to think, she grabbed her keys, muttered something to Adam about running errands, and stepped outside. David was waiting. He stood by the fence that separated their yards, his posture tense, his expression unreadable. As Claire approached, she could see the exhaustion in his face, the faint dark circles under his eyes, the way his shoulders sagged just slightly. He hadn't slept. Neither had she. "I told you last night," she started, but David cut her off. "I know what you said." His voice was quiet, but firm. "But I also know that you don't believe it." Claire inhaled sharply, her fingers curling into fists. "David, stop." "Stop what?" He stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. "Stop telling the truth? Stop wanting something I know you feel too." Her stomach twisted. "I don't feel anything," she lied. David let out a bitter laugh. "You're really going to stand here and say that?" She nodded, willing herself to hold his gaze. For a long moment he just looked at her. The space between them crackled with unspoken words, unacknowledged truths. Then, finally, he exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "All right," he said, stepping back. "If that's what you want." It should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt like a loss. Claire turned without another word, walking away before she could make an even bigger mistake. But as she stepped back into her house, shutting the door behind her, she knew, deep down, this wasn't over. Not yet. That night, Claire lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Adam slept beside her, his breathing slow and even. She should have felt safe here, wrapped in the warmth of familiarity, the life they had built together. Instead, all she felt was restless. The clock glowed 2:14 a.m. when she finally gave up trying to sleep. Slipping out of bed as quietly as possible, she padded downstairs, her heart inexplicably heavy. She wasn't expecting anything. But when she reached the kitchen and saw the faint glow from her phone screen, Her breath hitched. A message. From David. David, I meant what I said. But I won't bother you again if you don't want me to. Just say the word, and I'll walk away for good. Claire stared at the words, her fingers hovering over the screen. She could end this now. One message. One response. But the truth was, she didn't want to. And that terrified her. Claire's fingers hovered over the screen, her heartbeat loud in the silence of the kitchen. One message. One choice. She could end this now. Tell David to stay away, to forget everything he'd said, to erase whatever this was before it spiraled even further out of control. Or she could.
No.
She shook her head, trying to steady her breathing. This had to stop.
Now.
Before she could second-guess herself, she typed out a response. Claire, please don't text me again. Her thumb hovered over the send button. She should press it. She would press it. Any second now. The screen dimmed as the phone sensed her hesitation. With a frustrated sigh, she locked it and set it face down on the counter. Coward. She squeezed her eyes shut, gripping the edge of the counter, trying to will away the ache in her chest. This wasn't supposed to happen. She had a life, a family, a husband who loved her. Didn't she? A soft creak from upstairs made her heart lurch.
Adam.
For a brief, panicked moment, she thought he'd woken up, come downstairs, caught her standing there in the dark, drowning in thoughts she had no business entertaining. But the house remained still. She exhaled shakily and forced herself to move. Without checking her phone again, she made her way back upstairs, slipping into bed as quietly as possible. Adam didn't stir. Still, as she lay beside him, staring into the darkness, she knew sleep wouldn't come. Not tonight. And maybe not for a long time. The next morning, Claire went through the motions, making breakfast, packing lunches, forcing smiles. But she felt off-kilter, unsteady.
Adam noticed.
Everything okay? He asked, watching her from across the table. She nodded quickly, avoiding his eyes. Just tired. His gaze lingered for a moment longer than necessary, but he let it go. Claire busied herself with dishes, trying to ignore the way her hands trembled. She wouldn't check her phone. She wouldn't. But the second Adam left for work, she grabbed it off the counter. A message. Her pulse spiked before she even saw the name. But it wasn't from David. It was from her sister. Sophie. Hey, just checking in. Haven't heard from you in a while. Everything okay? Claire let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She should respond. She should tell Sophie everything, spill every terrifying, tangled thought eating away at her. But instead, she just typed,
Clare, I'm fine. Just busy. A lie.
One of many. As she set the phone down, her gaze drifted toward the window. David wasn't outside.
Good.
That was good. So, why did it feel like disappointment curled in her stomach instead of relief? Later that afternoon, Claire was folding laundry when the doorbell rang. Her breath hitched. For a second, she just stood there, staring at the hallway, her heartbeat kicking up. It wouldn't be him. It couldn't be him. She wiped her hands on her jeans and made her way to the door, forcing herself to breathe normally. When she opened it, she nearly collapsed from relief. It wasn't David. It was Adam, holding a bouquet of flowers. Claire blinked, momentarily stunned. What? He smiled, looking a little sheepish. I figured it's been a while since I brought you flowers. A lump formed in her throat.
Guilt.
Crushing, suffocating guilt. She forced a smile, taking them from his hands. Thank you. They're beautiful. He stepped inside, wrapping an arm around her waist, pressing a kiss to her temple. You've seemed a little distant lately, he murmured. I just wanted to remind you how much I love you. The lump in her throat grew. For a split second, she wanted to tell him everything. To confess, to beg for forgiveness, to fix whatever had cracked before it shattered completely. But instead, she just whispered, I love you too. Another lie. Or maybe the worst truth of all. That night, As she lay in bed beside Adam, her phone buzzed. She didn't check it. She didn't need to. She already knew who it was. And even though she didn't reach for it, didn't read the words waiting for her, she felt them settle deep inside her like a promise. This wasn't over. Not yet. I lie in the darkness, listening to my husband's breathing. Steady.
Calm.
He sleeps peacefully, unaware of the storm raging inside me. But I can't sleep. My phone sits on the nightstand beside me, its screen long since gone dark. But I know it's there. A message. A presence. A weight pressing against my chest, making it impossible to breathe. I haven't opened it. I haven't answered. But I haven't deleted it either. I turn toward the wall, squeezing my eyes shut. I need to stop this. To make things right. I try not to think about him. Not to think about what he said. About how he's waiting for my response. But the thoughts slip through anyway, creeping in like whispers in the dark. I tell myself I love my husband. I tell myself I love my family. But if that were true, would I be hesitating? I fall asleep late, slipping into a restless, uneasy sleep. And even there, in my dreams, he finds me. Morning comes like any other. Adam has already left for work, a note waiting for me on the kitchen counter beside a cup of coffee. Love you. Have a great day. I stare at the words longer than I should. Guilt wraps around my ribs, tight and suffocating. I am a good wife. A good mother. But that's a lie. I don't deserve these flowers. These soft words. This man who trusts me. My phone is still where I left it last night. I pick it up, press the screen. The message is still there. I meant what I said. But I'll walk away if that's what you want. Just tell me. I read it again and again, my fingers tightening like they might crush the phone. He's waiting. I could end this now. One word. But I don't type anything. Instead, I put the phone back down and go about my day pretending. That afternoon, I'm hanging laundry in the backyard. The motions are mechanical, thoughtless, the routine keeping me grounded. Until I feel it. A gaze. Not just any gaze. His. I don't want to turn around. But I do. He's standing on his porch, hands shoved into his pockets, perfectly still, but the tension radiates off him in waves. Our eyes meet.
I know what he wants to ask.
I know he's waiting. I don't give him an answer. I turn away, jaw clenched, focusing on the laundry as if it's the most important thing in the world. A few seconds later, I hear his back door close. But the feeling of his presence lingers. That night, when the house is quiet, I sit alone in the dim glow of the living room. The tea in my hands has long since gone cold. The phone rests on the table in front of me. His message is still there, waiting. I reach for it. I shouldn't, but I do. And before I can stop myself, I type a response. I don't know what I want. The second I hit send, my stomach twists painfully. I should have said something else. I should have said no. But it's too late now. His reply comes almost instantly. I don't read it right away. I just close my eyes, feeling something inside me crack. I know that tomorrow night, I'll go to him. I know I'll tell myself it's for the last time. But deep down, I'm terrified that there's no way back anymore. I barely sleep. When I wake, my body is heavy, weighed down by something invisible yet inescapable.
Guilt. Fear.
The unbearable ache of wanting something I shouldn't. Adam is already up, showering, getting dressed, moving through his routine as if nothing has changed. Because for him, nothing has changed. I force myself out of bed, moving mechanically through the morning. I make breakfast, pour coffee, pack lunches. Every movement feels rehearsed, automatic, like I'm playing the role of a woman I no longer recognize. Adam kisses my cheek before leaving for work. I smile. I say I love you, and I wonder if he can hear the lie beneath the words. The day drags. I try to stay busy, but nothing helps. I clean the house until my hands ache. I fold laundry that isn't even dirty. I scroll through my phone mindlessly, searching for something, anything that will pull me out of this spiral. But no matter what I do, my thoughts always circle back to the same place. The lake.
Tonight.
I tell myself I won't go. I tell myself I'll text him. I'll end this. I'll make the right choice. But the hours slip away, and the message remains unwritten. And deep down, I already know. I'm going. By the time the sun begins to set, my hands are trembling. Dinner is on the table. Adam and our son are eating, talking, laughing. The house is warm, filled with the sounds of a life I built. A life I'm about to shatter. I'm going out for a bit, I hear myself say. My voice is even, casual, but my heart is pounding so hard I wonder if they can hear it. Adam glances up. Where? I freeze for half a second too long. Just to clear my head, I say quickly, forcing a small smile. It's been a long day. He studies me for a moment, his fork hovering over his plate. Then he nods. Okay, drive safe. I kiss my son on the forehead. I don't look at Adam when I walk out the door, because if I do, I might break. The drive to the lake is a blur. My hands grip the steering wheel too tightly. My breath is shallow, uneven. The rational part of me screams to turn around,
to go home,
to pretend none of this ever happened. But I don't. I keep driving. And then suddenly I'm there. The lake is quiet, dark water stretching endlessly before me, the air thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. The parking lot is almost empty, except for him. David stands near the water's edge, hands in his pockets, waiting for me. I step out of the car, my legs unsteady.
I don't know what I'm going to say.
I don't even know why I'm here. But the moment his eyes meet mine, I realize the truth. I never really had a choice. Not from the moment he knocked on my door. Not from the moment he said my name. And as I walk toward him, my heart hammering in my chest, I know.
This isn't the end.
It's only the beginning. The night air is cool against my skin, but I feel warm, feverish. Like something inside me is burning, unraveling with every step I take toward him. David doesn't move. He just watches me, his expression unreadable, his body still but tense, as if he's waiting for me to make the first move. I stop a few feet away, my breath uneven. I should say something. I should tell him this was a mistake. But the words don't come. The silence stretches between us, thick and suffocating. And then, finally, I let out a shaky breath. I shouldn't be here. David exhales a slow, measured sound. But you are. I close my eyes for a second.
He's right.
I am. And that means something. We don't go inside the car. We don't walk along the shore. We just stand there, side by side, staring at the lake, the moon casting silver streaks across the water. The quiet is unbearable. Every inch of me is screaming to leave. But my feet stay planted in place. You told me to tell you what I want. I murmur finally, my voice barely above a whisper. David turns his head slightly, waiting. I swallow hard, staring at my reflection in the water. I don't know. It's the truth. I don't know what I want. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know how I got here, how I let myself get this close to a line I can never uncross. David doesn't respond right away. Then, quietly, he says, "You wouldn't have come if you didn't." I let out a sharp breath, shaking my head. It's not that simple. He doesn't argue, because we both know it is. Minutes pass. Maybe hours. I don't know how long we stand there, pretending this moment isn't changing everything. At some point, I glance at him. David is still looking at the water, his jaw tight, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. And I realize he's waiting for me. For permission.
For a sign.
For something. For a long time I thought he was the one pulling me into this. But now, standing here, my pulse roaring in my ears, I see the truth. I'm the one who came to him. I could have ignored his message. I could have said no. I could have walked away. But I didn't. And maybe that means I made my choice before I ever got in the car. I don't remember who moves first. Maybe it's him. Maybe it's me. Maybe we meet in the middle, drawn together like gravity, like something inevitable. All I know is that suddenly I can feel him, his warmth, his breath, the tension rolling off him in waves. He's close. Too close. And I don't step back. His hand brushes against mine, hesitant, waiting. My fingers twitch. One move. One single move is all it would take. I could turn around right now and leave. I could pretend none of this ever happened. But instead, I let my fingers close around his. The moment I touch him, the last piece of my resolve crumbles. David exhales sharply, his entire body going still, like he's afraid to break whatever fragile moment we've created between us. I should feel guilty. I should feel ashamed. But the only thing I feel is alive. I squeeze my eyes shut, my grip tightening around his. I don't know what happens next. I don't know how we move forward from this. But for the first time in years, I stop thinking, and I just feel. I barely remember the drive home. The road stretched ahead in a blur, the streetlights flickering past like ghosts. My fingers were numb against the steering wheel, my body still trembling from the weight of what I had done. What had I done? The moment still clung to me, burned into my skin. The heat of his hands, the way his breath had mingled with mine, the raw ache in his eyes as I pulled away. I should have never gone to him. I should have never let it get this far. But the truth was it had gotten this far. And now, there was no undoing it. I pull into the driveway, my pulse hammering in my ears. The house is dark except for the porch light, casting a soft glow against the door. The same light Adam leaves on for me every night. Guilt coils around my chest, squeezing tighter and tighter. I sit there, gripping the wheel, staring at the house that holds my family, my life. The life I had built. The life I had nearly thrown away tonight. For what? A moment of weakness? A longing I couldn't control? Or was it something deeper? Something I had been denying for far too long? I shake my head, forcing the thought away. It doesn't matter. I can fix this. I have to. Inside, the house is silent. I move carefully through the darkened hallway, my steps light against the wooden floor. Everything is exactly as I left it. The framed photos on the wall. The faint scent of Adam's cologne lingering in the air. The soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Home. But it doesn't feel like home anymore. Not after tonight. I reach our bedroom door and pause, my fingers hovering over the handle. A deep breath. Then another. I push it open. Adam is asleep, his body half turned toward my side of the bed. His face is relaxed, peaceful, unaware. He trusts me. The weight of that realization crushes me. I slip beneath the covers as carefully as possible, my body stiff, my mind racing. For a long time, I just lay there, staring at the ceiling. The bed feels too big. The air too heavy. I close my eyes, willing myself to forget the way David's hands had felt on my skin. To forget the way something inside me had cracked open the second I touched him. But I can't. And that terrifies me more than anything. Morning comes too soon. I wake to the sound of Adam moving around the room, getting ready for work. Sunlight spills through the curtains, casting warm golden light over the walls. Everything feels so normal. But I'm not normal. I'm fractured, split between the woman I was yesterday and the woman I am now. Adam leans down, pressing a kiss to my forehead. Morning, he murmurs. His lips are warm. Familiar. And for the first time in our marriage, I feel like a stranger beneath his touch. I force a smile, nodding. Morning. He lingers for a moment, his eyes searching mine. You okay?
No.
Yes, I say. If he notices the hesitation in my voice, he doesn't say anything. He just smiles, brushing a strand of hair from my face. I'll see you tonight. Then he's gone. And I am alone. I spend the day convincing myself that I will never see David again. That this was a mistake. That I will forget. But when night falls, I find myself standing by the kitchen window, staring out into the darkness. And I know, I won't forget. Not tomorrow. Not ever. Because something inside me changed when I let David touch me. And no matter how much I try to pretend otherwise, there's no going back. How often have you faced difficult choices, and have you always been able to find the right solutions? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's discuss if this story resonated with you. Support the channel, like, subscribe, and click on the bell to not miss new episodes. Let's talk together about things that really matter.